This is just a quick note about the video which is to follow, which concerns slow persistent leaks from the atmospheric breathe hole on your regulator fitting. Now, the majority of this video concerns steel air gun reservoir tubes, not aluminium, and I'll repeat that, steel air reservoir tubes. I'll put a small section at the end to do with aluminium tubes, but the majority of this is to do with steel tubes. Please do not go trying to clean out the inside of your aluminium tube with wet and dry paper, sandpaper, emery cloth or anything else. If you've got an aluminium tube, watch the section at the very end of this video. Every now and again I receive an email from somebody asking for help and advice on how to stop what is a very slow but persistent leak from the atmospheric breathe hole that they've drilled into their air reservoir whilst fitting the regulator. And they're having a great deal of trouble stopping this very slow leak, and the three things that they ask about are: is the regulator faulty and where is it leaking from? Why is there a leak? And how do I stop this leak? So these are the three things that we're going to cover in this short video. But before we go on to look at those, what we're going to do first is we're going to take a little look at a leak that I've caused earlier. So for this simple leak demonstration, all I've simply done is threaded a hair through the front of this Foster's valve fitting past the rubber seal. And so I'm just going to connect this onto the dive bottle, put it into this coloured liquid, and we'll see how big a leak one hair causes. So now please take note of the speed of this leak. Now my diver's bottle says about 190, 195 bar, and that's one hair simply threaded through the front of that Foster's valve. Now hopefully if I bleed this and then carefully manage to remove the hair, which we'll have a quick go at. Oh, it's broken off. See if it'll see if I can just twang that back and forth to move the little particle out the way. And now we'll give it another go. No, that's still leaking. Bloody typical. There we go. We've simply moved the piece of hair out of the way and the leak has stopped. Now you think how big a leak and quick a leak that was just with a piece of hair threaded through the front. Now just to show, there's the gauge on the bottle, and this leak has now stopped. Now this video is about slow persistent leaks from the breathe hole. Now when we're talking about slow and persistent, you've just seen the speed of the bubbles coming out of there. Now a slow persistent leak, we're talking probably one bubble of air the size of this pinhead once every 2 or 3 seconds, or even once a minute, or bubble this size every 10 seconds. So in comparison to the leak that we've just caused using one hair, these leaks through the breathe hole can be very, very, very slow indeed, and they can also be very tricky to get rid of. And so we're now going to look at where these leaks come from, why they occur, and how you can stop them. So firstly, is this slow and persistent leak from the atmospheric breathe hole that you've put in your air reservoir likely to be caused by a fault with the regulator itself or an internal fault with the workings? I think the chances of this are exceptionally slim to virtually zero. In the 18 years that we've been producing either one-off regulators or the more mass-produced units that we market on a daily basis, we've had two with problems that the customers have reported from new, and both of these were with the stem seal at the rear of the piston. One of these was we'd obviously caught the seal on the knife edge face when the regulator was put together, and although it passed its test, as the piston moved back and forward, the small cut obviously moved and it developed a small leak. And then the other one was the gentleman found a teeny piece of swarf inside the back there, even though we do ultrasonically clean them all before we put them together. But that's two over 18 years. So I think the chances of the leak coming from inside the regulator is extremely slim. Now, this is about the sixth take of this third part section of this video, because I've cocked my words up. Someone next door's been revving a motorbike, some people have been stood outside talking, and in all that time, before we started to make this section, we put one of the regulators in the test jig, and it's been stood on the side here now for, I guess, 15-17 minutes. So we test all these before they go out, so that's all full of air, and then hopefully if we spanner the air out the back end, fingers crossed, there's still pressure on the gauge here. So we leave these stood about before we send them out to check that they're okay. That's it. So this bit of advice just doesn't go for our regulators, but you know, I'll speak on behalf of other people manufacturing regulators. I think the chances of you getting an internal leak are very slim, or just bad luck, and if you do, it should just be a case of carefully taking it to bits, cleaning it, fitting new seals and popping it back together. But my big bit of advice is leave the regulator well alone, because it's 99.99% of a chance that the slow persistent leak is coming past the body case seals due to some marks on the inside of the reservoir tube. So we'll look at that in the second section. Section 2. What causes these long, slow, persistent leaks from the atmospheric breathe hole? Well, if you've got your air gun in front of you, hopefully the air gun reservoir tube on the outside is either nicely linished back or even maybe polished to a mirror finish that you can see your face in, and then it's been blacked, blued or phosphated. But on the whole, the outside appearance should be nice and even, no scratches, dents, dings, etc. So it's got a good finish. However, the same can't be said for the internal surface of the air reservoir, because in general, as long as the manufacturers have descaled it, cleaned it, got rid of any cutting lubricants and that's in there from the manufacturing process, then they don't need to do anything else to it. Now, you don't need to do anything to it unless you're going to fit a regulator, and then the section of the tube where the regulator fits needs to be polished and cleaned out as good as you can get it. Now, there is a video on doing this, and it's in the hints and tips playlist, and it's to do with cleaning and polishing your air gun reservoir cylinder before fitting a regulator. So you might want to watch this video in conjunction with the one that you're watching now. Now, although it's nice and finished on the outside, as we've already said, and the inside is going to be a bit rough, how does it start life initially? Well, to start with, your air gun reservoir is going to start as a piece of seamless hydraulic tube along the lines of this, and this is going to be the surface finish that it's got on it when it arrives at the manufacturers. And there's a good chance that this tube's not going to arrive in the correct lengths to make the reservoirs out of, but it's actually going to come in lengths up to 32 feet or 10 metres long, and so there's not much chance to clean out the inside of the tube. Now, when the tube's manufactured, the manufacturers will generally use quite a large industrial brush, a little bit like your shotgun cleaning jag, and force it through the long lengths of tube to try and get rid of any scale, but that's about really as much as is going to happen to it. And so if you're fitting a regulator, you need to make sure that the inside surface is nice and clean. Now, these leaks that you get, slow persistent leaks out of the atmospheric breathe hole, are to do with the junction of the body case seals with the air reservoir tube, and I think in general it's actually going to be the output end of the reservoir, of the regulator part of the reservoir that's going to be leaking, as opposed to the high pressure end, because you've got a less pressure in here at the low pressure end to force the seals onto the sides of the steel reservoir tube. And so if you've got a slow persistent leak, it's going to be between these body case seals and the inside of the reservoir. Now, the inside of your reservoir, although even if you polished it, it looks quite smooth. If you were to get a gauge in there or look at it with a microscope, you would see small little blemishes and bulges. Now, these little blemishes and bulges like this, where they're quite, you know, narrow, I suppose, and egg-like, they're just nicely rounded. The O-ring, obviously, you know, can deform into that shape and cause a seal quite easily. But you might get some other scratches, which, although very, very small, because if you're thinking it's a slow persistent leak, and we've seen how fast a piece of hair across a rubber seal causes a leak, the air is virtually gushing out. So if you're getting a little bubble every few seconds or a couple of minutes, then the scratch or whatever in the surface is going to be very small indeed. And so these are going to occur if you've got a little scratch. Obviously the rubber has got some give, and the pressure on it, it's going to force the rubber down into the little scratch and cause a seal. However, you might end up with a deeper scratch, and even after a day or two the rubber hasn't quite managed to deform to the bottom of this scratch, and it's that which is causing that very, very slow leak. So the thing to do is to polish the inside of the tube more vigorously, so as to open up the scratch a little bit and to let the rubber O-ring into that groove, and so stop the leak. And so in the third section we'll look at the best way of doing this. Section 3, hints and tips on how to stop this slow persistent leak from the atmospheric breathe hole. Now, firstly, before you fitted your regulator, you should have watched the video on cleaning the inside of your cylinder, which is in the playlist Fitting Hints and Tips. So you should have done that. If you've done that and you've still got a slow leak, then unfortunately the main tip is to go away and do that again, and just make sure that the inside of the cylinder is really thoroughly cleaned out and polished. I know it's a bit of a ball ache and it does take some time and elbow grease, but that is the big main tip for stopping these slow leaks. Now, without going and watching that whole video on cleaning the inside of the reservoir, it's generally quite simple. So all we do is mark on the cylinder where the regulator is going to sit. I mean, there's no need to clean the entire cylinder, just the section where the O-rings are going to be on the inside of the tube. So mark that up, simply use a wooden or plastic dowel with a slot in it, with some wet and dry paper of the correct grade. And then the best thing to do to pack this out so as it presses on the sides firmly is to use some jiffy or type J cloth and fold that in with the paper itself. And you can also use some lightly soaked water or some paraffin as a cutting fluid, but obviously you need to make sure that you clean all of that off and dry the cylinder as soon as you finish working on it. So on your dowel you can mark on the depth to which you need to push your cleaning rod back and forth, so as you only clean the correct section. So you can do that, and then just, I mean, you can obviously hold your piece of dowel in a small drill or a lathe, or mainly a battery operated drill, I guess most of you have got, and just keep cleaning that section and cleaning it until it's really like a mirror inside. So that's the main thing. So you can go away and watch that video. As I've said, it can be very hard work at times. Some leaks can be very persistent, but this is the main way to get rid of them. Other things that will help you to get rid of it, which you can do in conjunction with cleaning the cylinder, are quite simple. The simplest of them all is when you go to put the regulator back into your air reservoir tube, make sure that you've put plenty of the silicone grease into the slots around where the O-rings are. So get some of the grease on your fingers and really smear it in so it gets down in between the sides of the O-ring like that. And also make sure there's a good layer of the silicone grease inside the air reservoir tube itself. You know, don't be stingy on the amount of grease you put in, because that sort of acts like a seal, a bit like really thick sticky air, and it means that the O-rings get pressure behind them and, you know, holds the air pressure for longer, and the seals are more liable to push into any little cracks or nooks or scratches that are still remain within the air reservoir itself. Now, the other thing you can also do if you've got a very persistent leak that's getting on your pip is, quite simply, most of these O-rings come in lots of variations in sizes. There's very small variations. You can get O-rings from the point you can hardly see them up to colossal sizes, and so you can always fit the next size O-ring up. So if you take the O-ring off and carefully measure it, and then you could buy another set of O-rings that are the next size up. So when we say about this, there's 2 O-rings there, and even if I hold them right up to the camera, if it focuses, you won't be able to tell which one's the biggest. But one of those is very, very slightly bigger than the other. So you could always try and fit a slightly bigger size O-ring that you can quite easily source. You can generally find a good range of these at Seal Force 53 on eBay. He's got a very good range of seals on there. You could also try and fit softer rubber seals. The ones we fit are normally about 70% nitro, so you know they're fairly soft. But if you went down to 50%, it'd be a lot spongier, the seal, to the feel, and it's more liable to fit into any cracks or scratches in the cylinder. The other thing that you can do, which is easier than going out and buying different sets of O-rings, is quite simply PTFE plumber's thread tape. And this works perfectly okay, and it's perfectly safe. And all you need to do is just carefully put 1 turn or 2 turns of this tape around the groove where your body case O-ring fits. As simple as that. And then reinstall your O-ring over it, and then carefully with a sharp knife just trim off the end of the PTFE tape, and that's added a little bit of bulk width to the seal, and so it will be a tighter fit in, and then the PTFE bonds into the metal and onto the rubber seal, and that can help as well if the seals are slightly larger and it's a tighter fit within the reservoir tube. In general, if the inside of the tube is very well polished, the seal only just needs to be touching it. It doesn't need to be a really tight, you know, squeeze it in fit. Only on occasions when you have got a slow persistent leak. So some of you might have put the regulator in and thought, oh, it feels quite loose, and you haven't got a leak at all. Normally, as long as the O-rings are just touching the tube all the way round, as soon as you put the air pressure in, they squash up and form a good seal. So you can just use the PTFE tape or a slightly larger seal to get a better seal or more force on the tube when the regulator's fitted. That can help. And then the other thing is, once you've pushed the regulator in and it's been well covered in grease, the speed at what you fill your air reservoir, the speed at which you fill it with air. So, you know, you don't want to get hold of the bottle handle and wang it open as hard as you can, but also you don't just let it go. You know, you want to build the pressure up fairly quickly, so as the seals, you know, squash up and ram up. It's a bit like, you know, all sorts of things. You know, if you put a sudden bit of force on, things give and move, where if you push them gently, it's never going to happen. So if you open the bottle reasonably quickly, so as it goes shh and fills up, then that fairly quick rise in pressure can push the seals against the outside of the inside, I mean, of the tube, and help stop the leak. So they're basically the ways of stopping a slow persistent leak out of the atmospheric breathe hole. Number 1, clean and polish the inside of the cylinder. Number 2, clean and polish the inside of the cylinder. Number 3, clean and polish the inside of the cylinder. That's the big thing. After that, you can put some PTFE tape down to bring the seals out a little bit more, or fit slightly bigger seals, and make sure that you use plenty of silicone grease around the edge of the seals and in the cylinder, and then fill the reservoir relatively quickly, and that should, fingers crossed, stop all your problems. We've never had anybody yet fail to stop a slow persistent leak, or a couple of people who've actually visited us with their cylinder and we've polished them out for them and put the regulator in, and that's all it's been. It can be a real ball ache trying to stop them on the odd occasion, but luckily I guess out of every couple of hundred regulators we sell, there's probably just 1 or 2 people that have that problem, most of which after a quick polish manage to cure it. Now, when it comes to aluminium reservoir air guns, such as those marketed by FX and cloned with different people's names on, such as Webley and Logan, as of yet we've never had anybody report that they've had a slow persistent leak due to scratches or problems with the inside of the aluminium tube. The production method of the aluminium tube varies considerably with that of the steel, and it isn't so liable to end up with deep scratches or bulges and things in it which are going to cause a problem. And so if there has been a slow persistent leak in an aluminium air reservoir gun, it's due to the seal getting nicked as it's pushed past the different holes that are in the reservoir tube, and so that's the main thing to look out for. You mustn't go trying to polish out the inside of your tube with wet and dry paper, enemy cloth, etc. Do not do that. So if you have got a slow persistent leak and it's in an aluminium air reservoir gun, this is quickly what to do. Right, now to start with, there may be some dirt or thick grease or something up down the inside of the air reservoir, and so if you get some fairly fine softish type pan scourer, but when I say scourer, this is quite soft, and you could roll that into a ball, damp it slightly and push it back and forward carefully with a wooden dowel up and down the cylinder, or you might want to put a bit of light solvent on it to remove any dirt or grease from within the aluminium tube, and that's all you should really do to the tube itself. Obviously make sure that you've got any burrs off of the atmospheric breathe hole itself, but that's all you should do. After that, you just need to follow the practices that we've spoke about with the steel cylinder, which is fitting either a slightly larger size set of seals onto the body case so they stick out further and they're a tighter fit within the tube, adding a wrap of PTFE tape around the annular groove, and then still using the original seals. Just use the PTFE to pack the seal out a little bit, and then of course adding plenty of silicone grease onto the body case seals and down the air reservoir tube itself when you insert the regulator. So that's all you should really need to do to stop a slow persistent leak on an aluminium tube. If you do find you have got problems, then what you could go to then is make sure that you buy a set of seals that are less than 70% NBA. So you could buy a set of 50% ones so that they're a lot softer and mould to the tube better, or get some silicone grease which is high tack, which is very thick and sticky like treacle, and then that helps the build up of pressure behind the seal and forces it into any problem areas to stop any slow persistent leaks. But please don't go trying to scrub out the inside of your aluminium cylinder with wet and dry paper. That's a bad idea.